In 1773, a Scottish explorer named James Bruce walked out of the highlands of Ethiopia carrying 3 handwritten manuscripts that the rest of the world believed had been lost forever. One of those manuscripts was the complete Book of Enoch in ancient Ge'ez, untouched, unedited, preserved by monks who had guarded it with their lives. And inside that manuscript, in ink that had survived 15 centuries, was a name, Azazel. And beside that name, a list of every weapon he taught human hands to make. Tonight, that document is yours. For years, I have walked with people through their darkest nights, sat beside those who could not sleep. Not because the room was loud, but because something inside them was searching for something older, something true. Tonight we open the book of 1st Enoch, chapters 6 through 11, alongside the book of Jubilees. Chapter 4. These are books that never left the Ethiopian Orthodox canon. 81 books, while the rest of the world was given 66. And tonight's text contains something I have never shared before. Azazel did not just corrupt humanity. Enoch recorded the exact weapons he named: sword, knife, shield, breastplate, and the angel who will one day carry Azazel's sins back to him. Stay with me before we continue. Dear friend, if this ancient voice is bringing peace to your night, a quiet subscribe means that tomorrow night and the night after, this rest will still be here, waiting for you. You don't need to move, just a thought. Is this your first night here? Or have you been resting with us for a while? Now, let's go deeper. Before we speak of Azazel, before we speak of weapons and fallen angels and the corruption of a world, we must first sit in the days of a man whose name most people have never stopped to consider. Jared. Just that name, Jared. In the Western Bible, he appears for only a few verses, a name in a genealogy, a number attached to his years, and then silence. But in the Ethiopian Bible, in the Book of Jubilees, and in the ancient Ge'ez manuscripts that James Bruce carried out of the highlands, Jared is not a footnote. Jared is a marker, a line drawn in the story of humanity, before which the earth was one thing, and after which it would never be the same again. Let me tell you who he was. Jared was the 6th generation from Adam Moore. Think about that for a moment. 6 generations from the first human breath to the moment everything changed. His father was Mahalalel. His grandfather was Kenan. His great-grandfather was Enosh, the one the Book of Jubilees says was the first to call upon the name of the Lord, and Jared's son was Enoch, the very man who would witness what happened, walk with God in response to what happened, and be taken from this earth without tasting death, because of what he saw and what he recorded. Jared sat exactly between the purity of Adam's line and the catastrophe that was coming. He lived 962 years, according to Genesis chapter 5. and 62. In those years, he would watch the world change in ways no human before him had ever witnessed. Now, the Book of Jubilees, chapter 4, gives us something the Western Bible does not. It tells us the meaning of his name in Ge'ez, the ancient liturgical language of Ethiopia. Yared means he who descends, or the one in whose days they came down. This name was not accidental. For over 1,500 years, Ethiopian Orthodox scholars and priests read this name as a prophetic marker embedded by divine intention into the genealogy of Genesis. The name itself was understood to be a record preserved in human flesh and lineage, that in the days of this man, something would descend Donner. And tonight, if you have ever felt like your life sits at a crossroads, like something is shifting around you, and you cannot name what it is, Jared understood that feeling. He was born into a world that was about to change, and his very name carried the weight of what was coming. You are not alone in standing at the edge of something. The Book of Jubilees tells us something else about this period, something that helps us understand why the descent happened. In Jared's days specifically, it tells us that the Watchers were not sent to earth as rebels. Not at first. The text in Jubilees chapter 4 and chapter 5 describes the original mission of the Watchers as one of instruction and oversight. They were sent to teach the children of men to do judgment and uprightness upon the earth. Read that again slowly. They were sent to teach righteousness, and somewhere in the long years of Jared's life, something went wrong. The teachers became the corrupters, the guides became the fallen, and Enoch, Jared's own son, would be the one called to witness it all and carry the record forward. In just a moment, we reach the passage in 1 Enoch, chapter 6, where the Watchers gather on the summit of Mount Hermon and swear an oath together. Enoch records the number of them, the names of their leaders, and the exact Hebrew meaning of the mountain's name where they made that oath. That name, Mount Hermon, carries inside it the very word they spoke that night. Stay with me. But before we get there, I want you to feel the weight of what Jared's days actually looked like. The Book of Jubilees paints a picture of a world that was ancient and yet recognizable. People were building, people were planting, communities were forming, families were spreading across the earth. And in the middle of all of this, Jared was raising his son Enoch, teaching him the ways of his fathers, walking him in the paths of righteousness that had been passed down from Adam himself. The Ethiopian tradition holds that Enoch was taught to write by the angels who had not yet fallen, that before the corruption came, there was a transfer of sacred knowledge from heaven to earth through Enoch that was meant to preserve what was about to be lost. Think of it this way: before the flood of darkness came, God was already preparing the Ark of Words, and that Ark was a young boy named Enoch, son of Jared, growing up in the last peaceful years before everything changed. If that is you tonight, if you feel like you are standing in the last quiet moment before something shifts, let the name Jared steady you. He did not know what was coming either, but his son became the most important witness in the history of the ancient world. God does not waste the days before the storm. The genealogy in Genesis chapter 5 lists Jared's years with a quiet dignity, and Jared lived 162 years, and he begat Enoch. One verse. But the Ethiopian tradition fills that one verse with 962 years of meaning. A man who lived long enough to see the world before and the world after. A man whose name meant descent and who raised the sun that would ascend without dying. Jared, the one in whose days they came down, and now we go to the mountain where they landed. There is a mountain that sits on the border of what we today call Lebanon, Syria, and Israel. It rises 9,000 feet above the surrounding land. Its peak is white with snow, even in summer, and its name, in Hebrew, is Hermon, Karam, from the root word Karam, which means a thing devoted to destruction, a sacred ban, something set apart, under oath, never to be undone. The mountain's very name contains the oath that was sworn upon it. Think about that. Whoever named that mountain named it after what happened there, or perhaps named it in anticipation of what would happen, as if the earth itself remembered. 1 Enoch chapter 6 opens with these words, "And it came to pass, when the children of men had multiplied, that in those days were born unto them beautiful and comely daughters. And the watchers, the sons of heaven, saw them and desired them." Now, before we go further, I want you to understand what the Book of Enoch means when it uses the word watchers, because this is not a vague term. The word used in the original Ge'ez text of 1 Enoch is Iaret, or in its Aramaic form found in the Dead Sea Scrolls, Ire. In Ge'ez and Aramaic both, Ire means the wakeful ones Re'or, those who never sleep. This specific term appears in the Dead Sea Scrolls fragments of Enoch, discovered in Cave 4 at Qumran in 1952, fragments that date to at least 200 years before the birth of Christ, confirming that this text and this specific word existed long before any medieval invention could explain it away. And tonight, if you are lying there and sleep will not come, if your eyes remain open in the darkness, there is an ancient irony in that word. The ones who never slept brought the knowledge to earth. That has kept humanity restless ever since. But the God who made you for rest, not for the wakefulness of the watchers, but for the peace that existed before they descended. You were made for sleep, dear friend. Back to chapter 6. The text tells us that the watchers looked at the daughters of men, and their leader spoke. His name was Semyaza, and Semyaza said to those around him, "I fear that perhaps you will not agree to do this deed, and I alone will pay the penalty for this great sin." Read that carefully. Their leader, before they had done anything, was already calculating who would bear the blame, and the 200 who stood with him answered, "Let us all swear an oath and bind one another by mutual curses not to abandon this plan, but to do this thing." 200 watchers gathered on the summit of Mount Hermon and swore together that they would descend on it. The Book of Enoch then gives us their names, all 20 leaders, recorded by name in chapter 6, verses 7 and 8. Semyaza, Artakifa, Ramil, Kokabil, Tamil, Ramil, Danel, Exekiel, Barakiel, Asiel, Armaros, Batariel, Ananel, Zakiel, Samsapil, Satariel, Turiel, Yomiel, Sariel, and the one we will spend the most time with tonight, Azazel. 20 names, 20 leaders, each commanding 200 in total, descending from Mount Hermon into the days of Jared. In just a moment, we come to chapter 8 of 1 Enoch, the passage that contains what no other ancient text outside Ethiopia preserved in full: Azazel's specific list, not just weapons in general, but the exact items named: sword, knife, shield, breastplate, and something else, something that will stop you when you hear it, because it explains something about our world today that no history class ever taught you. Stay with me. When the watchers descended, the earth received them. And 1 Enoch chapter 7 tells us what happened next. They took wives from among the daughters of men, and those wives bore children. The text says, "And they became pregnant, and bore great giants, whose height was 3,000 cubits." Now, Ethiopian Orthodox scholars do not read this number literally in all cases. The tradition holds that the number speaks to their greatness, their otherness, their nature as beings who did not belong entirely to this world. But what the text is consistent about is what these giants did. They consumed all the acquisitions of men, and when men could no longer sustain them, the giants turned against them and devoured mankind. The earth was being consumed from within, and still the watchers continued. Chapter 7 then transitions into something that many readers miss because they are focused on the giants. It tells us that the watchers themselves began to teach, and what they taught was not limited to war. Azazel taught weapons, but Semyaza taught enchantments. Armaros taught the resolving of enchantments. Barakiel taught astrology. Kokabiel taught the constellations. Ezekiel taught the knowledge of the clouds. Arakiel taught the signs of the earth. Shamziel taught the signs of the sun. Sariel taught the course of the moon. The entire curriculum of forbidden knowledge divided among the leaders. each one responsible for corrupting a different part of human understanding. It was not random, it was organized. A systematic transfer of knowledge that humanity was not yet ready to carry. That always gets me. The organization of it. This was not chaos. This was not accident. This was a structured curriculum of corruption. And yet, God had already prepared a witness, a young man named Enoch, who would document every name, every teaching, every consequence. Maybe that speaks to you too, that even in the most organized darkness, God prepares a record keeper. We are about to go deeper into the specific record that Enoch kept about Azazel, the weapons, the name, the punishment, and the desert, where he waits even now. But first, let your body settle a little more. Feel the weight of you against whatever is beneath you. The story is old, the darkness outside is quiet, and you are held of all the names in that list of 20. One name carries more weight than the others. Not because he was the leader. Semyaza was the leader. Not because he was the most powerful. The text does not rank them that way, but because of what he chose to teach, and because of what God chose to do with him specifically. At the end, Azazel. Let that name sit for a moment, Azazel. Before we open chapter 8, I want to give you the name itself, because the name is the first record. The name Azazel, in its Hebrew root form, carries two possible meanings that scholars have debated for centuries. The first reading as meaning strength or fierce, and El meaning God giving us. The fierce one of God, or God's strength turned outward. The second reading from the root Azal, meaning to remove or to carry away, giving us, the one who carries away. Now here is what makes this extraordinary. Both meanings appear in the same text. Azazel is described in 1 Enoch as one who carried fierce knowledge to humanity, weapons, war, vanity. And in Leviticus chapter 16, the scapegoat ritual of Yom Kippur, the Day of Atonement, the sins of Israel were symbolically placed upon a goat, and that goat was sent into the wilderness to Azazel. The one who taught humanity to carry weapons becomes the one who carries the weight of sin away from humanity. This connection between 1 Enoch's Azazel and Leviticus chapter 16 was debated and then deliberately obscured when the Book of Enoch was removed from the Western canon. At the Council of Carthage in 397 AD, agree because if Enoch remains in the canon, the Leviticus scapegoat ritual has a name and a story and a consequence. That changes how you read the entire Old Testament. And tonight, if you have ever felt like you were carrying something that was never yours to carry, this ancient text says, there is a name for that weight, and there is a ritual. Older is a ritual than Rome, older than Greece, older than almost everything. That speaks directly to the act of laying it down. You were not made to carry what Azazel taught. Now we open 1 Enoch chapter 8, and I want you to hear this slowly, because this is the passage that the Ethiopian Orthodox priests have read in their stone churches in Aksum for over 1600 years. The text says, "And Azazel taught men to make swords, and knives, and shields, and breastplates." Stop there for a moment. Swords, knives, shields, breastplates, 4 specific items. Not a vague reference to violence. Not a general corruption of humanity, but a curriculum, a specific list of what one angel chose to put into human hands. The text continues, "And he showed them the metals of the earth, and the art of working them, and bracelets, and ornaments, and the use of antimony, and the beautifying of eyelids, and all manner of precious stones, and all coloring and dyes deditlent." Read that again. Weapons, and beauty, war, and vanity, in the same lesson from the same angel. Azazel did not just teach men to kill. He taught women to adorn themselves in ways designed to increase desire, increase conflict, increase the very conditions that would make the weapons necessary. This is not mythology. This is a description of a system. Create the desire, create the conflict, supply the weapons. And Enoch, standing in the days of Jared, watched it all unfold and wrote it down, name by name, item by item. In just a moment, we reach the passage where the earth itself cries out. 1 Enoch records that the ground beneath human feet brought an accusation before the throne of God. Not a human prayer, not an angel's report, but the earth, the soil, the created world itself, lifting its voice. And the 4 archangels who heard that cry have names and assignments. That will tell you something about who is watching over you tonight. Stay with me, but let us stay with Azazel a little longer, because chapter 8 does not end with the weapons list. It ends with a verdict. "And there was great impiety, and much fornication, and they went astray, and all their ways became corrupt." The text is describing not just individual sin, but systemic corruption, a world that had been redirected at its foundations. And then, in verse 2 of chapter 8, comes a line that I have read many times, and it still stops me. Amazarach taught all those who cast spells and cut roots. Armaros taught the releasing of spells. Barakiel taught astrologers. Kokabeel taught portents. Ezekiel the knowledge of the clouds. And Arakiel the signs of the earth. And Shamsiel the signs of the sun. And Sariel the course of the moon. Every corner of the natural world, every phenomenon that humans looked at with wonder and fear, the clouds, the stars, the sun, the moon, the roots of plants, the signs beneath their feet, each one assigned to a teacher who was not supposed to be here. And at the center of all of it, Azazel, the one who started with swords and ended with a world that had forgotten what peace felt like. Now I want you to notice something about what is not in this list. Fire. The Watchers did not teach humanity fire. Agriculture. The Watchers did not teach humanity to farm. Language. They did not give humanity words. The Ethiopian tradition is careful here. The gifts that sustain life, warmth, food, communication, these came from God. Through the line of Adam, passed down through Seth, through Enoch, through Kenan, through Mahalalel, through Jared. What the Watchers taught was everything that accelerates destruction while mimicking progress. Weapons that look like protection, beauty rituals that look like celebration, astrological knowledge that looks like wisdom. The corruption was not obvious. It never is. Did you catch that? The Watchers did not take away what God gave. They added what God withheld. For a reason, the knowledge was not wrong because it was knowledge. It was wrong because humanity was not yet ready to carry it without being destroyed by it. Beautiful and sobering at the same time. Let your breathing slow now. The room around you is still, and the story we are inside is older than every war, every weapon, every conflict that has ever kept you awake at night. It was recorded so that you would know this did not begin with you, and it will not end with you either. There is something about a list, a real list, with real names, real items, real sequence. That feels different from a story. A story can be dismissed. A legend can be explained away. But a list demands to be read, item by item, slowly. And tonight, we are going to read this list the way the Ethiopian priests read it, the way it was meant to be received, not as history from a distance, but as a record handed to you personally. 1 Enoch chapter 8, verse 1. And Azazel taught men to make swords. The sword. In the ancient world, the sword was not simply a weapon. It was a statement. Before Azazel, the Book of Jubilees and the Ethiopian tradition hold that human conflict existed, but the organized, metallurgical, intentional creation of an instrument designed specifically to end human life, that was new. The sword said something that a stone or a branch never could. It said, I have devoted time and skill and fire and metal to the specific purpose of killing you. That level of intentionality in destruction, the Ethiopian text places at the feet of Azazel. The gaze word used in the Ethiopian manuscript for sword in this passage is sif. Sif. In Ge'ez, sif does not only mean sword, its root carries the meaning, that which divides what was joined. This word, sif, appears in Ethiopian Orthodox liturgical texts as a metaphor for spiritual division, the severing of the soul from God, the cutting of covenant, the separation of what was meant to remain whole. Ethiopian monks at the monasteries of Lake Tana used this word in their commentaries to connect Azazel's physical weapon to a spiritual reality, that the sword was never just metal, it was the embodiment of division itself, entering human hands for the first time. And tonight, if there is something in your life that feels severed, a relationship, a piece, a version of yourself that feels cut off from where it should be, the Ethiopian tradition says that kind of wound has a name that is older than your pain. And the God who watched Azazel teach division is the same God who, in the Book of Enoch, sends an angel specifically to heal the earth of everything Azazel tore apart. That healing is coming in tonight's text, but first, list the list and knives. After the sword, the knife. Smaller, more personal, more intimate in its violence. The sword is for the battlefield. The knife is for the moment when the enemy is close enough to look at. Enoch records both because both were taught. The curriculum of Azazel covered every scale of violence, from the organized to the intimate, and shields. Now here is where it becomes deeply interesting, because a shield is not an offensive weapon. A shield is defense, and yet Enoch includes it in the list of corruptions. Why? The Ethiopian Orthodox commentary tradition answers this question in a way that I find quietly devastating. Because once you teach a man to make a sword, you create the need for a shield. The corruption was not just in the weapon. It was in the entire ecosystem that the weapon created. Azazel did not just hand humanity a sword and walk away. He handed humanity an arms race, a world where the sword requires the shield, and the shield justifies the sword, and the cycle never ends. We are still living in that cycle tonight. And breastplates, the fourth item. Full body armor, organized, fitted, deliberate. By the time we reach breastplates, we are no longer talking about a single act of violence. We are talking about an institution, armies, organized, equipped, sustained conflict between groups of human beings who had learned from a fallen angel how to make this not just possible, but efficient. In just a moment, we reach the part of tonight's text where the women of Jared's days receive their own curriculum from Azazel. And what he taught them is recorded in Enoch chapter 8 with the same specificity as the weapons list, item by item, including one substance whose name in Ge'ez connects directly to a ritual that Ethiopian women still practice today in the same highlands, where James Bruce found these manuscripts in 1773. Stay with me. But let us finish the weapons list first, because after the breastplate, chapter 8 shifts. And Enoch writes, "And he showed them the metals of the earth and the art of working them." The metals of the earth. This line is the hinge of the entire passage, because it tells us that Azazel did not just hand humanity finished weapons. He taught them metallurgy, the science, the art, the process of taking raw material from the ground, applying fire and skill, and transforming it into something that did not exist before. Ethiopian Orthodox theology reads this moment as the great inversion. God took the dust of the earth and breathed life into it, creating humanity. Azazel took the metals of the earth and breathed destruction into them, creating weapons. Both acts begin with the earth. One produces a living soul. The other produces an instrument of death. The parallel is not accidental. And then, after the metals, after the art of working them, the list turns in a direction you might not expect. And bracelets, and ornaments, and the use of antimony, and the beautifying of eyelids, and all manner of precious stones, and all coloring and dyes, from swords to bracelets, from breastplates to the beautifying of eyelids, in the same chapter, in the same curriculum, from the same teacher. The Ethiopian tradition does not separate these two lists. It holds them together deliberately because the text is making a statement about the relationship between vanity and violence, between the creation of desire and the creation of the weapons. That conflict over desire requires. This is not a condemnation of beauty. The Ethiopian Orthodox tradition is filled with beauty, gold, color, ornament, incense. This is a record of beauty. Weaponized. Beauty used not to reflect the glory of God, but to create hunger in human hearts that could only be satisfied through conflict, through possession, through the very swords listed just verses before. Let that sink in. The weapons and the beauty were one curriculum, not two separate corruptions, one system. Yes, the list in 1 Enoch chapter 8 is only a few verses long, but those few verses contain the architecture of almost every war ever fought. Create desire, create scarcity, create conflict, supply the weapons. Enoch saw it, named it, recorded it in the days of Jared, and the Ethiopian priests carried that record through 15 centuries of invasion and fire and empire, so that tonight, in the quiet of wherever you are, you could hear it. The list was preserved for you. Can I be honest with you for a moment? There are nights when I look at the world around me, the conflict, the noise, the endless cycle of desire and destruction, and I wonder if peace is still possible for people like us. And then I come back to this text, and I remember. Enoch lived inside that same world, and still walked with God. I don't have it all figured out either. But tonight, this ancient voice steadies me. Maybe it steadies you too. There is a tenderness required when we come to this part of the text, because the women of Jared's days are not villains in Enoch's record. They are not condemned. They are not blamed. They are recipients of knowledge that was brought to them from outside, from above, from a source. They had no framework to evaluate or refuse, and I think, if we are honest tonight, most of us know what that feels like. To receive something That looks like a gift. That feels like an elevation. And only later, much later, understand what it cost. Tent, techt. Let us go back to chapter 8, to the second half of Azazel's curriculum. After the weapons, after the medals, after the breastplates, the text turns and records what was taught specifically to the women, and the use of antimony. Antimony, this one word, sitting quietly in the middle of an ancient manuscript, is the doorway into something that connects the highlands of Ethiopia to the bedroom where you are resting tonight. The Ge'ez word used in the Ethiopian manuscript for antimony in this passage is coal, also rendered in some manuscripts as cool. In Ge'ez, and in the broader Semitic tradition, coal refers specifically to a dark powdered substance derived from antimony or lead sulfide used to darken and define the eyes. Now, here is what makes this remarkable. The use of coal as an eye cosmetic predates written history in Ethiopia and across the ancient Near East. But the Ethiopian Orthodox commentary tradition, preserved in the monasteries of Lake Tana, records something that Western scholarship almost entirely overlooked. The monks noted that coal appears in two completely different contexts in the Ethiopian canon. First, as the corrupting cosmetic of Azazel's curriculum in 1 Enoch chapter 8, and second, in the Ethiopian medical and liturgical texts as a substance used to protect the eyes of newborn children from evil influence, the same substance taught as an instrument of vanity and desire by a fallen angel was later reclaimed by Ethiopian mothers as a protection over their most vulnerable. For over 2,000 years, Ethiopian women have lined the eyes of their newborns with coal in a tradition that the monks of Lake Tana connected directly to this passage in Enoch, as if to say, what was used to corrupt can be reclaimed and turned toward protection. And tonight, if there is something in your past, something that was used against you, something that entered your life dressed as a gift and left a wound, this ancient tradition whispers that God has a history of taking what was meant to destroy and reclaiming it for protection. Nothing in your story is beyond that reclaiming. Back to chapter 8. After antimony, the text continues, and the beautifying of eyelids. This phrase, in the Ethiopian manuscript tradition, carries a weight that the English translation does not fully capture. The Ge'ez commentary reads this, not simply as physical beautification, but as the deliberate alteration of how a person presents themselves to the world, the creation of a self that performs rather than simply being. And in that reading, the text becomes startlingly modern, because we live in a world that has perfected the beautifying of eyelids in every sense: physical, digital, social, the performance of a self that is more desirable, more powerful, more worthy of attention than the self that simply exists. Enoch watched it begin in the days of Jared, and he wrote it down, not with condemnation, but with grief. In just a moment, we reach the passage that I consider the most quietly devastating in all of 1st Enoch. It is not the weapons, it is not the giants. It is a single verse in chapter 8 where Enoch records that after everything Azazel taught, after the swords and the ornaments, and the beautifying of eyelids, there arose much godlessness, and they committed fornication, and they were led astray, and became corrupt in all their ways. What makes it devastating is not the sin, it is the sequence. First the knowledge, then the desire, then the corruption, then the forgetting. The same sequence, Enoch says, that began in Jared's days, is the sequence we still live inside tonight. Stay with me. The text then moves to something that the Western Bible almost entirely erased. The teaching of sorcery to the women specifically. Chapter 7, verse 1, in some Ethiopian manuscript traditions, includes a passage about the Watcher's teaching, the cutting of roots, and the use of herbs to produce effects in the physical world. This is not generic witchcraft. The Ethiopian tradition understands this as the corruption of the healing arts, because before the Watchers descended, the knowledge of roots and herbs existed in its pure form, passed down through the line of Seth as a gift of healing. What the Watchers did was take that knowledge and show how it could be twisted, turned from healing toward manipulation, toward control, toward the production of desire in another person without their knowledge or consent. The corruption of the healer into the manipulator, and Enoch grieved it. You can feel the grief in how he writes. He is not a distant historian recording events from safety. He is a son of Jared, watching his generation be hollowed out from the inside. There is a moment in the Ethiopian liturgical tradition that connects to this section in a way that I find deeply comforting. During the feast of Saint Michael, celebrated in the Ethiopian Orthodox calendar, there is a reading from the Book of Enoch that specifically mentions the women of Jared's days, not as a cautionary tale, but as a lamentation. The priest reads their story, and the congregation responds with a prayer, not of judgment, but of mercy. Lord, have mercy on those who did not know. That is the Ethiopian response to this passage, not condemnation, mercy. For those who received knowledge, they had no framework to refuse. If that is you tonight, if you received something once that you didn't ask for, didn't choose, but carried anyway, the oldest response in the Ethiopian canon to that kind of wound is not judgment. It is, Lord, have mercy on those who did not know. That prayer is for you tonight. Let the room be quiet now. You don't need to carry the analysis any further tonight. The women of Jared's days were not forgotten by God, and neither are you, there is a moment in 1st Enoch that most readers pass over because they are looking for the dramatic, the angels, the giants, the weapons. But the moment I want to sit with you in tonight is quieter than all of those. It is the moment when the earth speaks denet, not metaphorically, not as poetry, but as a witness standing before heaven with an accusation. 1st Enoch chapter 7, verses 3 through 6 builds toward this moment slowly. The giants have been born. The corruption is spreading. The weapons are in human hands. The sorcery is being practiced. And then the text says, "And the earth laid accusation against the lawless ones." The earth laid accusation. In the legal language of the ancient Near East, an accusation laid before a judge was not a complaint. It was a formal charge requiring a response, requiring judgment, requiring action. The earth was not crying out in pain, though it was in pain. The earth was filing a case, and the court was the throne of God. The Ge'ez word used in the Ethiopian manuscript for the earth's accusation in this passage is Turgum. In Ge'ez, Turgum carries the legal meaning of a formal witness testimony, or the cry of one who has been wronged, presented before a rightful authority. This specific legal framing of the earth as a witness appears nowhere in the Western biblical canon, because the passages of Enoch that contain this language were excluded from the Council of Carthage in 397 AD. But in the Ethiopian Orthodox legal tradition, this concept of the earth as witness influenced how Ethiopian ecclesiastical courts understood justice. For over 1,500 years, the idea that creation itself holds testimony, that the ground beneath human feet remembers what happened upon it and carries that memory before God. This is not a primitive superstition. This is a legal and theological framework that says nothing done in the physical world escapes the record of creation itself. And tonight, if you have ever felt that something wrong was done and no one saw it, no one recorded it, no one will ever account for it. The Ethiopian tradition says the earth saw it. The ground beneath it carries the testimony, and there is a court older than every human institution where that testimony will be heard. Now, let us look at what the earth witnessed before it brought its accusation. Chapter 7 traces the sequence with a precision that reads almost like a legal document. First, the watchers took wives. Second, the wives bore giants. Third, the giants consumed the food of men. Fourth, when the food was gone, the giants turned against men and devoured them. Fifth, the giants began to drink blood. Sixth, the earth could no longer sustain what was happening upon it, and at the sixth stage, the earth rose and spoke. There is something in that sequence that I want you to hold tonight. The earth did not cry out at the first sin. It absorbed, it endured, it's sustained. But there is a threshold, beyond which even creation cannot remain silent. And when that threshold was crossed, the earth did not collapse in despair. It stood up and brought its testimony to the only court with the authority to respond. In just a moment, we reach chapter 9 of 1st Enoch, where 4 archangels, standing at the corners of heaven, look down at the earth and see everything. Enoch names all 4 and gives each one a specific title, a specific role, a specific assignment in response to what Azazel taught. One of those archangel names appears in only 2 places in all of ancient literature: 1st Enoch and a single fragmentary text discovered in the Dead Sea Scrolls. And what that angel is assigned to do speaks directly to whatever you are carrying tonight. Stay with me. Chapter 9 opens with one of the most visually striking passages in all of Enoch. And then Michael and Uriel and Raphael and Gabriel looked down from heaven and saw the quantity of blood being shed upon the earth, and all the iniquity being done upon the earth. 4 archangels at the threshold of heaven, looking down. And what do? They do not immediately act. They do not descend with swords. They do not strike the watchers from the sky. The text says, they said to one another, "The earth robbed of her children cries out to the gates of heaven, and their groaning has ascended, and cannot cease because of the lawless deeds that are wrought upon the earth." The archangels heard the earth's testimony and repeated it to each other, as witnesses confirming a witness, before bringing it before the throne. There is a legal precision to this that the Ethiopian Orthodox tradition understood deeply. Justice does not move in chaos, even in the face of the worst corruption, the worst violence, the worst abuse of what God created. The response moves through order, through witness, through testimony, through the proper presentation, before the proper authority. Heaven is not panicking. Heaven is building a case. Chapter 9 continues with the archangels presenting the full accusation before God, and they name Azazel specifically. Korah, thou seest what Azazel hath done, who hath taught all unrighteousness on earth, and revealed the eternal secrets which were preserved in heaven. The eternal secrets which were preserved in heaven. This phrase stops me every time, because it tells us something about the nature of the knowledge Azazel shared. It was not invented knowledge. It was not Azazel's personal creation. It was preserved knowledge. Knowledge that existed in heaven, held back from humanity, not out of cruelty, but out of care. The Ethiopian tradition teaches that certain knowledge requires a maturity of soul to carry without being destroyed by it. And the watchers, impatient with God's timeline or contemptuous of it, handed humanity what humanity was not yet ready to hold. And then the archangels say something that has stayed with me since the first time I read it in an Ethiopian commentary, translated from Ge'ez and Semyaza, to whom thou hast given authority to bear rule over his associates, has made known spells and has divulged to the children of men. Authority. The archangels remind God that Semyaza was given authority, that these were not rogue forces operating outside God's awareness. These were beings entrusted with a role who chose to corrupt that role. And the Ethiopian tradition holds that this reminder was not an accusation against God. It was an acknowledgement that the corruption happened within a framework of trust, and that the response would need to match the scale of that betrayal. Did you catch that? The archangels did not rush. They witnessed, they gathered testimony, they presented the case with order and precision, even in the face of the worst thing that had happened since creation began. Heaven did not panic. Heaven did not panic. And if heaven did not panic, then it is not panicking over whatever feels overwhelming to you tonight. Let that settle. The earth spoke and heaven heard. Your voice is not smaller than the earth's, and the court that heard the earth's testimony is still in session. When the testimony was complete, when the earth had spoken, when the 4 archangels had carried that testimony to the threshold of heaven, God responded not with silence, not with delay, not with the kind of cosmic indifference that a suffering world sometimes fears. God responded with names, 4 of them, each one assigned, each one commissioned, each one sent with a specific task toward a specific wound. And tonight, I want to give you those names, one by one, the way the Ethiopian priests have spoken them for 1600 years, because these are not abstract forces. These are persons with assignments that are still active. 1 Enoch chapter 10, verse 1. Then said the Most High, the Holy and Great One spoke and sent Uriel to the son of Lamech. The first name, Uriel. Uriel is sent not to the watchers, not to the giants, but to Noah, the son of Lamech, who at this point in the narrative is still a child. God's first response to the corruption of the world is to protect a child. Uriel is sent to warn Noah, to tell him what is coming, to give him time to prepare. And the Ethiopian tradition holds that this moment is the first act of divine rescue in response to Azazel's teaching. Before the judgment falls, the vulnerable are warned. Before the flood comes, the child is protected. The name Uriel, in its Hebrew root form, means God is my light, or more precisely, the flame of God. But in the Ge'ez manuscript tradition of the Ethiopian Orthodox Church, Uriel carries an additional title found nowhere in Western angelology. He is called Uriel Tsehe. In Ge'ez, Tsehe means the sun, or the light that comes before dawn, making Uriel's full Ethiopian title, the flame of God, who carries the light that comes before dawn. This title appears in Ethiopian Orthodox liturgical manuscripts dating to the 4th century AD, preserved in the rock-hewn churches of Lalibela, where priests still invoke Uriel by this full title during the pre-dawn hours of morning prayer. And tonight, if you are lying in the dark and the dawn feels very far away, the Ethiopian tradition has a name for the angel assigned to the hours between darkness and light, Uriel Tsehai, the flame of God, who carries the light that comes before dawn. He was the first one sent, and he was sent to protect someone who could not yet protect themselves. The second name, 1 Enoch chapter 10, verse 4. And again the Lord said to Raphael, bind Azazel hand and foot, and cast him into the darkness. Raphael, the angel whose name in Hebrew means God heals Rayor, the medicine of God, is given the assignment of binding Azazel, not destroying him, binding him. There is a theological precision here that the Ethiopian Orthodox tradition spends considerable time with. Raphael is the healer, and he is sent not to heal Azazel, but to contain him, because the healing is not for Azazel. The healing is for the earth, and the earth cannot begin to heal while the source of its wound remains unbound. This sequence matters. First contain the source of the wound, then heal what was wounded. The Ethiopian tradition reads this as a divine principle, not just a historical event. In just a moment, we reach the passage where God gives Raphael the exact location where Azazel is to be bound. A specific desert with a specific name in a specific direction from a specific landmark, and the name of that desert in its Ge'ez form contains a meaning that connects directly to the scapegoat ritual of Leviticus in a way that Western scholarship only began to acknowledge in the 20th century. But Ethiopian priests have been reading that connection for 1600 years. Stay with me. The third name. 1 Enoch chapter 10, verse 11. And the Lord said unto Michael, Go and bind Semyaza and his associates, who have united themselves with women, so as to have defiled themselves with them in all their uncleanness. Michael, the archangel whose name means who is like Godress, given the assignment of binding the leader. Semyaza, who organized the descent, who gathered the 200 on Mount Hermon, who swore the oath that set everything in motion. Michael is sent specifically for him, and the text records, what will happen to Semyaza and his associates with a quiet severity that I want you to hear. Bind them fast for 70 generations in the valleys of the earth till the day of their judgment, and of their consummation till the judgment that is for ever and ever is consummated. 70 generations. In the Ethiopian Orthodox tradition, the number 70 is not always read as a literal count. It is understood as the complete span, the full measure, the totality of what is required for justice to be satisfied. The binding of Semyaza is not temporary containment. It is the beginning of a process that moves toward a final accounting that the Ethiopian tradition holds has not yet concluded. The fourth name, 1 Enoch chapter 10, verse 9. And to Gabriel said the Lord, proceed against the bastards and the reprobates, and against the children of fornication, and destroy the children of the watchers from amongst men. Gabriel, whose name means, God is my strength for, the strong one of God, is given the most direct assignment of the four. He is sent toward the consequences of what the watchers produced. Not the watchers themselves, not the women who received their teaching, but the hybrid existence that resulted, the giants, whose nature belonged to neither world fully. And the Ethiopian commentary tradition reads Gabriel's assignment with a compassion that surprises most first-time readers. The text says the giants will destroy each other, and Gabriel is sent to oversee that process. The Ethiopian monks noted that God did not need Gabriel to destroy what was destroying itself. He sent Gabriel so that even in the unraveling, even in the inevitable collapse of what was never supposed to exist, there would be a witness, a presence, a divine oversight over the ending of something tragicer. Even the giants did not end unwitnessed. That always gets me. 4 archangels, 4 wounds, 4 specific assignments. Uriel for the vulnerable child, Raphael for the binding of the source, Michael for the leader of the corruption, Gabriel for the tragic consequences. God did not send one general response to a general problem. He sent named messengers to named wounds. Maybe that speaks to you tonight, that whatever is specific about your pain is not too specific for a named response. The room is quieter now. Feel that. 4 names spoken in the throne room of heaven over the days of Jared, over the wounds of a world that had been taught to destroy itself. And those same 4 names carried in the Giz manuscripts through 15 centuries of fire and empire into this night where you are resting, and they are still on assignment. There is a place that Enoch names with a precision that has puzzled Western scholars for centuries. A desert, not a vague wilderness, not a general emptiness. A named place with a specific geography, a specific direction, a specific set of instructions for how to get there. And it is to this place that Raphael, the medicine of God, carries Azazel, bound hand and foot, and covers him in darkness. Let us go there tonight, slowly. 1 Enoch chapter 10, verses 4 through 6. And again the Lord said to Raphael, bind Azazel hand and foot, and cast him into the darkness, and make an opening in the desert, which is in Dudael, and cast him therein. Dudael, that name, and place upon him rough and jagged rocks, and cover him with darkness, and let him abide there forever, and cover his face, that he may not see light. Cover his face, that he may not see light, the one who taught humanity to make swords that divide, to make ornaments that create desire, to reveal the eternal secrets of heaven, before humanity was ready, is taken to a desert, bound hand and foot, his face covered, so that he cannot see, the light he left to corrupt. The place named Dudael has been debated by scholars since James Bruce brought the Enoch manuscripts out of Ethiopia in 1773. Western scholarship long assumed it was a mythological location, a literary device with no geographical anchor. But the Giza manuscript tradition, preserved in the Ethiopian Orthodox Church, holds a commentary that Western scholarship only began to take seriously in the late 20th century. The Ethiopian commentary connects Dudael to the Hebrew term Beth Hadudo, meaning the place of the sharp and jagged rocks, or, in its fuller GEs, rendering the hollow of God's cauldron. The sharp, jagged rocks mentioned in the text itself are not decorative detail. They are the definition of the place, and the Ethiopian monks of Aksum, who preserved this commentary, connected Dudael to a specific geological feature in the wilderness region southeast of Jerusalem, a terrain of broken basalt rock and deep desert ravines that to this day remains one of the most inhospitable landscapes in the ancient Near East. Furthermore, the Ethiopian commentary tradition makes explicit what Western scholarship only acknowledged after the Dead Sea Scrolls were discovered in 1947, that the scapegoat ritual of Leviticus 16, where the sins of Israel are placed upon a goat, and that goat is sent, la Azazel, into the wilderness, is a direct ritual echo of this passage in Enoch. The goat walks the same direction toward the same desert, carrying the same weight that Azazel himself was bound beneath. For 1,500 years, Ethiopian priests read Leviticus and Enoch as one continuous conversation, while the Western Church, reading them separately with Enoch removed, could only guess at what La Azel meant in Leviticus. And tonight, if you have ever participated in any act of release, any moment of laying down what you were never meant to carry, you were touching something older than you knew, a ritual thread that runs from Leviticus through 1st Enoch, through the monasteries of Aksum, to this moment in the quiet of your room. The act of letting go has ancient roots. The text continues, and on the day of the great judgment, he shall be cast into the fire. Dudael is not the final destination. It is a holding place, a bound darkness between the corruption and the final accounting. And this detail matters more than it might seem at first, because the Ethiopian tradition teaches that the binding of Azazel is not the resolution of the story. It is the containment while the healing happens. Raphael binds Azazel in chapter 10, and then immediately the text turns to what happens to the earth after the binding, and heal the earth which the angels have corrupted, and proclaim the healing of the earth, that they may heal the plague, and that all the children of men may not perish through all the secret things that the watchers have disclosed, and have taught their sons, heal the earth. The same angel who binds the source of the wound is commissioned to heal what the wound produced. Raphael, the medicine of God, does not do one thing and move on. He contains, and then he heals in sequence. In just a moment, we reach the sleep transition, the place in tonight's text where the words become sound and the sound becomes rest. But before we get there, we pass through the final verses of chapter 10, where God speaks not about judgment, not about binding, not about destruction, but about what the earth will look like after the healing. What righteousness restored actually feels like on the ground beneath human feet. Enoch describes it with a tenderness that will carry you gently into sleep. Stay with me just a little longer. 1 Enoch chapter 10, verses 16 through 22. And this passage I want to read slowly, more slowly than anything we have read tonight. And then shall the whole earth be tilled in righteousness, and shall all be planted with trees and be full of blessing. The earth that laid its accusation before heaven will be planted, and all desirable trees shall be planted on it, and they shall plant vines on it, and the vine which they plant thereon shall yield wine in abundance. Vines, wine, abundance. Where Azazel taught division, the earth will be planted. Where the sword was made, the vine will grow. And as for all the seed which is sown thereon, each measure of it shall bear 1,000, and each measure of olives shall yield 10 presses of oil. 1,000-fold. The Ethiopian tradition holds that this passage is not only eschatological, not only about the end of days, it is a statement about the nature of God's restoration, that what was corrupted will not merely be returned to zero, it will be returned with abundance, not just healed, multiplied. Let that sink in. Not just healed, multiplied. The earth that groaned under the weight of what Azazel taught will one day yield 1,000-fold from every seed sown in righteousness. Yes, and then the final verse of this section that I want to leave with you before we cross into rest. And cleanse thou the earth from all oppression, and from all unrighteousness, and from all sin, and from all godlessness, and all the uncleanness that is wrought upon the earth. Destroy from off the earth, cleanse the earth. The same earth that was taught war, and vanity, and sorcery, and division, will be cleansed, not abandoned, not destroyed and replaced, cleansed. The Ethiopian Orthodox tradition returns to this word again and again in its liturgy, its prayers, its fasting seasons, because it teaches something about how God relates to what He made. He does not discard what has been corrupted. He cleanses what He created, And if that is true of the earth, it is true of you. You've heard enough for tonight. Dear friend, you have traveled far, from the days of Jared to the summit of Mount Hermon, through the list of weapons and the cry of the earth and the 4 names spoken in heaven and the desert of Dudael, where the weight was bound, hand and foot, beneath jagged rocks and darkness. You carried all of that with me tonight, and now let the words become the sound. Just let them wash over you. You don't need to understand. You don't need to remember. You don't need to hold any of it. Just receive. The earth was cleansed. The healer was sent. The light before dawn has a name, and you are held. Let go now. Just let go. The Book of Jubilees. In the Ethiopian Orthodox canon, this book is called Kufale, which in Ge'ez means the divisions, a retelling of Genesis and Exodus given to Moses on Mount Sinai by the angel of the presence, not written by human hand alone, but dictated from a heavenly source to a man standing on holy ground. And in this book, the days of Jared are not a footnote. They are a chapter, a carefully measured, deliberately preserved record of what happened when the world was young and the watchers came down tent. Jubilees chapter 4 opens with the genealogy we have already walked through tonight. Adam, Seth, Enosh, Kenan, Mahalalel, Jared. But Jubilees adds something to each name that Genesis does not. It gives us the year, not just the lifespan, but the precise year in the Jubilee calendar that each event occurred. The Jubilee calendar, used in Ethiopian Orthodox tradition, divides time into cycles of 49 years, 7 weeks of years, each cycle called a Jubilee. And in the Jubilee calendar, the descent of the Watchers is placed with precision. In the 11th Jubilee, in the 3rd week, in the 1st year of that week, Jared took a wife. And in the 11th Jubilee, in the 5th week, Enoch was born. And in the 12th Jubilee, in the 7th week, the Watchers descended. Jubilees chapter 5 opens with language that mirrors 1st Enoch, almost word for word. And it came to pass, when the children of men began to multiply on the face of the earth, and daughters were born unto them, that the angels of God saw them on a certain year of this Jubilee, that they were beautiful to look upon. And they took themselves wives of all whom they chose, and they bare unto them sons, and they were giants. The language is almost identical to 1st Enoch chapter 6, because these books were not written in isolation. They were written in conversation with each other, within a tradition that understood them as parts of a single record, a record that the Ethiopian Orthodox Church never separated, never ranked against each other, never placed in a hierarchy where one canceled the other. They read together as one voice, speaking from different angles about the same truth. Dedalent. Jubilees chapter 5 continues, and God saw that the earth was corrupt, and that all flesh had corrupted its order, and all the sons of men were wicked and sinful, and unclean in all their ways. All flesh had corrupted its order. That phrase, corrupted its order. In the Jubilee understanding, order is not simply a rule. Order is the shape of creation, the way things were designed to relate to each other. The sun to the moon, the season to the harvest, the human heart to the God who made it. And what the Watchers introduced was not just sin, it was disorder, a fundamental disruption of the relationships that held creation together, tenet. And then Jubilees gives us something that first Enoch does not, a record of God's internal response. And God looked upon the earth, and behold, it was corrupt, and all flesh had corrupted its order upon the earth. And he said, I shall destroy man, and all flesh upon the face of the earth which I have created, I shall destroy. That word, in the Jubilee tradition, is read with grief, not anger. The Ethiopian commentary on this passage, preserved in the monastery traditions of Lake Tana, describes God's response as that of a craftsman who made something beautiful with his own hands and watched it be corrupted from the outside. The decision to cleanse the earth came not from rage, but from a love that could not bear. To watch what he made be unmade from within talented. Jubilees chapter 5, verse 6. And against the angels whom he had sent upon, he was exceedingly wroth. He was exceedingly wroth, and he gave commandment to root them out of all their dominion. And he bade us to bind them in the depths of the earth. He bade us. The angel of the presence, speaking to Moses on Mount Sinai, uses the word us. The binding of the Watchers was a collective act of heaven, not a single archangel acting alone, but the assembled hosts of the heavenly court responding together to a collective corruption, and their dominion was taken. Whatever authority the Watchers had been given, whatever role they had been trusted with, was removed. Not temporarily suspended, removed. Depths. Jubilees chapter 5 continues with Noah, and he said, Let us make a righteous man, and let us plant him as the plant of the eternal seed. A righteous man planted as an eternal seed, after everything, after the corruption, after the weapons, after the giants, after the cry of the earth, after the binding of the Watchers. God's response is a seed. One family, one man, one act of preservation, planted in the ground of a broken world, to grow into something that would outlast everything. The Watchers built. Noah, who was warned by Uriel before the flood came, who was protected while the world around him collapsed under the weight of what Azazel taught. Jubilees chapter 5, verse 19. And he made for all his works a new and righteous nature, so that they should not sin in their whole nature forever, but should be all righteous each in his kind always. a new and righteous nature, not a patched nature, not a repaired nature, not a nature that remembers its wound and limps forward, new. The Jubilee tradition holds that what God intended from before the foundation of the world was not merely the correction of what the Watchers corrupted, but the establishment of something that could never be corrupted again. A nature so thoroughly made new that corruption would have nothing to take hold of. 10 talents. Let those words settle now. A new and righteous nature. Not fixed, new. Let that be the last thought that your mind holds before it releases into sleep. The Book of Jubilees carried that promise through 49-year cycles of sacred time, through the Jubilee calendar of the Ethiopian Orthodox Church, through the monastery libraries, through the highlands, through the hands of monks who guarded it with their lives, to this night, to you. There is a book that sits at the center of Ethiopian civilization. Not just Ethiopian Christianity, Ethiopian civilization. Its laws, its kingship, its understanding of who it is as a people and why it exists in the place it exists. That book is the Kebra Nagast, which in Ge'ez means the glory of kings Tenetent. It was compiled in its present form in the 14th century by a scholar named Isaac, working under the Metropolitan Yebruk in the city of Aksum. But the traditions it contains are far older. Some of the oral traditions preserved within the Kebra Nagast trace themselves back to the period of Solomon and the Queen of Sheba, 1,000 years before Christ. And within those ancient traditions, woven through the genealogies and the theology and the history of sacred objects, are echoes of what we have been reading tonight. Echoes of the Watchers, echoes of the corruption, echoes of the divine response. Preserved not in the language of Enoch, but in the language of a people who understood themselves to be the custodians of something heaven entrusted to them, Declarant. The Kebra Nagast opens with a declaration that sets the tone for everything that follows. The glory of kings cometh from God, and it is he alone who giveth it, and who taketh it away when he willeth. The glory of kings comes from God. This is not a political statement in the Ethiopian Orthodox reading. It is a theological one, a direct response to the corruption of the Watcher period. Because what the Watchers attempted when they descended onto Mount Hermon, when they swore their oath, when they taught humanity the weapons and the sorcery and the eternal secrets of heaven, was to establish a glory that did not come from God, a knowledge outside of divine permission, a power built on corrupted foundations. And the Kebra Nagast, from its very first words, answers that attempt. Glory comes from God, only from God, and it is he alone who gives it. The Kebra Nagast then moves into the story of Solomon and Makeda the Queen of Sheba. And in the Ethiopian tradition, this story is not simply a romantic encounter between a wise king and a curious queen. It is the story of wisdom returning to its proper home. Solomon possessed wisdom given to him by God, and Makeda, queen of the land, that had preserved the Book of Enoch and the Book of Jubilees and the traditions of the Watchers, came to sit at the feet of that wisdom. The Kebra Nagast records her journey with a reverence that the Ethiopian Orthodox tradition has never lost. And she said unto him, My Lord, I came to thee with a burdened heart, and I have found comfort in thy presence. A burdened heart, finding comfort in the presence of wisdom. Nights. There is a passage in the Kebra Nagast that connects directly to what we have been reading tonight. In the section dealing with the transmission of sacred knowledge from Solomon to his son Menelik, the text speaks of the dangers of knowledge given before its time. And God gave wisdom to Solomon, not that he should use it for his own glory, but that through him the glory of God might be made known to all the ends of the earth. Knowledge given not for personal glory, but for the glory of God, to be made known to all the ends of the earth. This is the direct inversion of what Azazel did. Azazel took knowledge preserved in heaven and gave it to humanity for the production of desire and conflict and personal power. Solomon received knowledge from God, and the Kebra Nagast records that its purpose was always outward, always toward the ends of the earth, always in service of something larger than the one who held it. Danelect. The Kebra Nagast records the birth of Menelik, Solomon's son by Makeda, with a particular tenderness, and the child grew and became a young man of excellent figure and understanding, and wisdom was given unto him from his birth. Wisdom given from birth, not stolen, not purchased, not taught by fallen angels, on a mountaintop, under an oath of mutual corruption, given from birth. The Ethiopian tradition holds that this distinction is everything. The difference between what the Watchers gave and what God gives is not simply moral, it is foundational. What is stolen or corrupted requires maintenance, requires secrecy, requires the binding of others into the same corruption to sustain itself. What is given by God needs none of that. It simply grows like a seed planted in righteous ground. Denpletent. Menelik eventually travels to Jerusalem to meet his father Solomon. And the Kebra Nagast records that Solomon recognized him immediately, not because Menelik announced himself, not because he carried documents or proof, but because wisdom recognizes wisdom. And Solomon looked upon his face and was astonished, for he was like unto himself in form and figure. The king saw himself in his son, and in that recognition, a covenant was renewed between Jerusalem and Ethiopia, between the wisdom of Solomon and the ancient traditions of the land that had preserved what the rest of the world was losing. Insects. The Kebra, Nagast concludes its account of Menelik with his return to Ethiopia carrying the Ark of the Covenant, and the Ethiopian Orthodox tradition holds that the Ark rests to this day in Axum, in the Church of Our Lady Mary of Zion, guarded by a single monk called the Guardian of the Ark, who spends his entire life in the service of that custody, never leaving, never stepping away. One man, one lifetime, one sacred object. The same tradition that preserved the Book of Enoch through 15 centuries of fire preserves the Ark through the same faithfulness. Because in the Ethiopian Orthodox understanding, preservation is not passive, it is a calling. Someone must stand watch, so that what was entrusted is not lost. And tonight, you are the recipient of that watch. Every monk who copied the Giez manuscripts by candlelight in the stone churches of Axum, every priest who read the Book of Enoch in the pre-dawn hours of morning prayer, every guardian who stood watch over something ancient and true was standing watch for this night, for the moment when these words would reach someone lying in the quiet of wherever you are, needing to hear that the glory of kings comes from God. And so, does your rest. There is a moment in 1st Enoch that most readers do not expect. After everything, after the weapons, after the corruption, after the cry of the earth, after the binding, the watchers come to Enoch, not to threaten him, not to silence him. They come to him with a petition. They ask him to pray for them, not tete-a-tete. 1st Enoch chapter 13, verse 1. And Enoch went and said, Azazel, thou shalt have no peace. A severe sentence has gone forth against thee to put thee in bonds. Enoch first delivers the judgment. He does not soften it. He does not negotiate it. He does not apologize for it. The sentence is severe, and Enoch speaks it clearly. And then the text moves to something that I find among the most quietly remarkable passages in all of ancient literature. And all the others together with them besought Enoch to write a petition for them that they might find forgiveness, and to read their petition in the presence of the Lord of heaven, the watchers, who taught humanity to make swords, who descended onto Mount Hermon, who swore an oath of mutual corruption, who produced giants, who filled the earth with violence, asked Enoch to pray for them. Let that sit for a moment. These were not small beings making a small request. These were the wakeful ones, the ones who never slept, the ones who had stood in the presence of God before the foundation of the earth. And they came to a human man, the son of Jared, and asked him to intercede. Tenet. 1st Enoch chapter 13 continues. And Enoch went off and sat down at the waters of Dan in the land of Dan, to the south of the west of Hermon, and he read their petition till he fell asleep. He sat by the waters. He read their petition and he fell asleep. The man who walked with God, who witnessed the corruption of a world, who received the visions of heaven, fell asleep by the waters of Dan, holding the petition of fallen angels. And while he slept, and behold, a dream came to me, and visions fell down upon me, and I saw visions of chastisement, and a voice came bidding me to tell it to the sons of heaven, and reprimand them. The answer came in sleep. Not in waking argument, not in theological debate, not in the noise of the day. In sleep, the answer to the deepest question of the ancient world came to Enoch while he was resting by still waters. Chapter 14 opens with Enoch's response to what he received in that sleep, the book of the words of righteousness and of the reprimand of the eternal watchers, in accordance with the command of the Holy Great One. In that vision I saw in my sleep what I will now tell with a tongue of flesh, and with the breath of my mouth, which the Great One has given to men to converse therewith, and understand with the heart. Now, with a tongue of flesh and the breath of my mouth, Enoch is aware in this moment of what he is. He is a human being made of flesh, breathing with lungs, speaking with a tongue, and yet he has been trusted with the answer to the petition of angels. The Ethiopian tradition holds that this moment is one of the great dignities bestowed on humanity in all of ancient scripture, that God chose to answer the watchers through a man, not through another angel, not through a heavenly decree delivered directly, but through Enoch, son of Jared, flesh and breath and a tongue that God gave to men to converse therewith. Chapter 14 then carries Enoch into a vision of the heavenly throne room, and this vision is one of the oldest descriptions of the throne of God in all of ancient literature. And I observed and saw inside it a lofty throne, and its appearance was as crystal, and the wheels thereof as the shining sun. And there was the vision of cherubim, a throne of crystal, wheels like the shining sun, cherubim. And from underneath the throne came streams of flaming fire, so that I could not look thereon. Streams of flaming fire beneath the throne, and the great glory sat thereon, and his raiment shone more brightly than the sun, and was whiter than any snow. Whiter than any snow, the great glory. And Enoch, standing there, flesh and breath, tongue of a man, trembling, and no angel could enter, and could behold his face, by reason of the magnificence and glory, and no flesh could behold him. No angel could enter, no flesh could behold him, and yet Enoch was there. The Ethiopian tradition does not resolve this tension. It holds it because the tension itself is the point, that God makes a way for the ones he chooses to stand in places that should be impossible for them to stand. Lanant. And then, chapter 14, verse 24. And the Lord called me with his own mouth and said to me, Come hither, Enoch, and hear my word, and go say to the watchers of heaven who have sent thee to intercede for them, you should intercede for men, and not men for you. You should intercede for men, and not men for you. This was the answer to the petition, not a yes, and not a simple no, but a reminder of the original order. The watchers were sent to watch over men, to teach righteousness, to intercede on behalf of humanity before the throne of God, and they had inverted that order. They had come to a man and asked him to intercede for them. The answer from the throne was the order restored in words. You were sent for them, not them for you. Enoch carries that answer back to the watchers. And 1 Enoch chapter 16 records their response. And they were all afraid, and fear and trembling seized them. All afraid, the ones who never slept, trembling. Not because of the punishment they already knew, but because of the clarity of what they had done. They had inverted the order of heaven, and in the answer, delivered through a man made of flesh and breath. That inversion was named plainly, without anger, without cruelty, just plainly. Let those words carry you now. You should intercede for men, and not men for you. There is an order. Two things. An order that was disrupted in the days of Jared. An order that God has been restoring ever since, through the binding of Azazel, through the healing of Raphael, through the seed of Noah, through the Jubilee calendar, through the Kebra Nagast, through the monks of Axum, through the manuscripts of Lake Tana. Through this night, the order is being restored. And you are not outside that restoration. You are inside it, resting inside it, right now, before we come to rest completely. There is one more gift that the Book of Enoch gives us tonight. The names, all 20 of them, the leaders of the watchers, recorded by Enoch in 1 Enoch chapter 6, verses 7 and 8. 20 names that the Ethiopian Orthodox canon never removed, never obscured, never replaced with silence. And tonight, I want to read them to you slowly, one by one, the way a priest in Axum might read them in the pre-dawn hours of morning prayer, not as a lesson, not as information to be retained, but as a record being read aloud in the presence of someone who is almost asleep. Let the names wash over you. The first name, Semyaza, the leader, whose name in Ge'ez and Hebrew means, "My name has seen her." He who sees by name, the one who gathered them on the summit of Mount Hermon, who spoke first, who feared he would bear the penalty alone, and who was bound by Michael in the valleys of the earth for 70 generations. Semyaza Detelet. The second name, Artakifa, whose name carries the meaning, he who binds tightly Frior, the one who fastens. One of the 200 who swore the oath on the mountain. Artakifa.tent, the third name, Ramil, from the root Ram, meaning height or exaltation, and El, meaning God, the exaltation of God or God's High One, a name that speaks of elevation carried by one who chose to descend, Ramil, Datalekt. The fourth name, Kokabiel. In Ge'ez and Hebrew, Kokab means star, and El means God. Star of God or the one who belongs to God's stars. The teacher of astrology who took the knowledge of the stars, given as signs and seasons, and turned it toward divination. Kokabiel Datenglate, the fifth name, Tamiel, from the root Tam, meaning completeness or perfection, and El, God, the perfection of God or God's complete one, Tamiel Talatlet. The sixth name, Ramiel, from Ram, height, and El, God, the thunder of God read in some Ge'ez manuscript traditions, or God's mercy from on high in others, a name that carries both storm and tenderness. Ramiel Nent, the seventh name, Danel, not to be confused with the prophet Daniel, though the names share a root. Dan, meaning judge, and El, God. God is my judger, the judgment of God. The Ethiopian commentary tradition notes this name with a quiet irony that one who carried the name, God is my judge, chose a path that made that judgment inevitable. Denel, top planet. The eighth name, Ezekiel, from the Hebrew root Chazak, meaning strength, and El, God. God strengthens Freyer, the strength of God, the teacher of the knowledge of clouds, who took the weather, the rain, the storm, the drought, and taught humanity to read them as omens rather than gifts. Ezekiel Datalekt, the ninth name, Barakiel, from Barak meaning lightning, and El, God. Lightning of God or the flash of God, the teacher of astrology who carried a name that should have spoken only of divine illumination. Barakiel, the 10th name, Asael, from Asa meaning healer or physician, and El, God. God heals or the physician of God, a name almost identical in meaning to Raphael, the archangel sent to bind Azazel and heal the earth. The Ethiopian tradition holds that this parallel is not accidental, that in the naming of Asael, there was always a capacity for healing that was turned toward corruption instead. Asael Tantlet, the 11th name, Armaros, whose name in some Ge'ez traditions carries the meaning accursed one or he who is devoted to destruction, the teacher of the resolving of enchantments, who knew how to undo what other watchers had bound. Armaros Tlet, the 12th name, Bateriel, from roots meaning in the house of God, Neor, God's dwelling, a name that speaks of intimate proximity to the divine. Bateriel Klet, the 13th name, Anel, from Anan, meaning cloud, and El, God, the cloud of God, God's covering, a name that in its pure form speaks of shelter, of protection, of the kind of covering that shields what is vulnerable from what would harm it. Ananel Tonelet, the 14th name. Zachiel, from roots connecting to the purity of God or God's clear one. Zachiel, Dotenlight, the 15th name. Samsapil, a compound name whose Ge'ez rendering connects to the sun and to vision, the one who sees by the light of the sun or sun-faced before God. Samsapil Detentlat, the 16th name. Satarael, from roots meaning the hidden things of God or God conceals, a name that speaks of mystery, of the sacred things held back for the right time. Satarael Tolet, the 17th name. Turiel, from Tur, meaning mountain or rock, and El, God. God is my rocker, the mountain of God. Turiel Detlent, the 18th name. Yomiel, from Yom, meaning day, and El, God, the day of God or God's appointed time, a name that carries within it the idea of divine timing, of a moment appointed before the foundation of the world. Yomiel Dotlet, the 19th name. Sariel, from roots meaning the Prince of God, God's commanding one, the teacher of the course of the moon, who took the rhythm of the night sky and corrupted its reading. Sariel Dotlet, and the 20th name, the one we have spent the most time with tonight. Azazel Descended, whose name means the fierce one of God or the one who carries away, who taught the sword and the knife and the shield and the breastplate and the metals of the earth and the beautifying of eyelids, who now lies bound in the desert of Dudael, beneath jagged rocks and darkness, his face covered, that he may not see the light he left to corrupt. Azazel Dotelat, 20 names. Read aloud in the quiet of this night, not because you need to remember them, not because you need to remember them, not because there will be a question at the end, but because Enoch recorded them so that they would be known, and the Ethiopian priests preserved them so that they would be read. And tonight they have been. The record is complete. The names have been spoken into the air of wherever you are, and now there is nothing left to hold, nothing left to carry. Just the quiet and the dark and the sound of your own breathing, slower now. The shepherd is watching tonight. He knows where you are. He knows what you carried today. He knows the weight of the weapons that this world still teaches. He knows the cry of your earth, and he has already sent the answer by name. You are not in the days of Jared, watching the darkness descend. You are in the care of the one who bound what needed binding, who healed what needed healing, who planted the seed that outlasted everything the watchers built. Sleep now, dear friend. The shepherd is watching, and You are known.